Good evening. Theresa May has confirmed that the Brexit deal will mean Britain having to leave the European single market. The Prime Minister made that clear as she unlines the government's plans ahead of the negotiation with the EU, which will begin once Article 50 is invoked in March. She also revealed that the final deal agreed between the EU and the UK will be voted on by both Houses of Parliament. Well, that news helped boost the pound after losing nearly a fifth of its value against the dollar since the referendum. It rebounded strongly today and is currently on course to enjoy its best day against the greenback since 2008. And that was despite the confirmation that a hard Brexit is now most definitely on the cards.
As a priority, we will pursue a bold and ambitious free trade agreement with the European Union. This agreement should allow for the freest possible trade in goods and services between Britain and the EU's member states. It should give British companies the maximum freedom to trade with and operate within European markets, and let European businesses do the same in Britain. But I want to be clear. What I am proposing cannot mean membership of the single market.
Mrs May wasn't quite so emphatic, however, when it came to her plans for the customs union.
Now, I want Britain to be able to negotiate its own trade agreements, but I also want tariff-free trade with Europe and cross-border trade there to be as frictionless as possible. That means I do not want Britain to be part of the common commercial policy, and I do not want us to be bound by the common external tariff. These are the elements of the customs union that prevent us from striking our own comprehensive trade agreements with other countries. But I do want us to have a customs agreement with the EU. Whether that means we must reach a completely new customs agreement, become an associate member of the customs union in some way, or remain a signatory to some elements of it, I hold no preconceived position. I have an open mind on how we do it. It is not the means that matter, but the ends.
Well, let's have a look at some of the business reaction to Mrs May's speech. The CBI tweeted, ruling out single market membership has reduced options for maintaining barrier-free trading between the UK and the EU. Mike Hawes, the chief executive of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, tweeted, the Prime Minister acknowledged the importance of single market arrangements to automotive, getting beneficial free trade agreement and customs union critical, but an immense challenge. And the chief executive of the manufacturers' organisation, the EEF, said, in the end, it's the detail of the final agreement that will matter, and it is important that this will be open to parliamentary scrutiny. Parliament and business will want to see a very clear evidence-based plan to ensure the UK economy avoids collateral damage arising from our departure. Well, the property developer Richard Tice is the co-chairman of Leave Means Leave. He's in our central London studio, and the former City Minister, Lord Myners, is here with me. He described last June's referendum as the saddest day of his business career. Well, Lord Myners, let me start with you. Theresa May essentially wiping the slate clean here. Is that a good thing? I mean, it's a bit like an incoming CEO issuing a profits warning and putting out the base case before saying things will get better from here.
Well, I think she's set out a baseline for negotiation, and much of this we knew already. She's been very, very clear that control of migration is important, that sovereignty is non-negotiable, and that we will no longer be subject to the judgments of the European Court of Justice. So she's reaffirmed that. She's raised doubts around membership of the customs union. Quite frankly, it's pie in the sky. We cannot remain a member of the customs union on the conditions that she's spelt out. She's set out an extraordinarily tight and demanding timetable. I'm not sure there are many people who believe it can all be done within 2 years. And she said that Parliament is going to have a final vote on this. What is Parliament actually going to have to vote on? And what if Parliament says no?
OK, Richard Tice, let me take up some of those points with you. There is a lot of concern, isn't there, that EU leaders are going to regard what Mrs May says as cherry-picking. She's trying to cherry-pick the best bits of the single market and customs union.
No, I don't think so at all. I think she's been crystal clear. We're leaving the single market. As Lord Myners has just clarified, effectively we're going to leave the customs union. We're not cherry-picking at all. The Prime Minister has quite rightly said we're going to have a new relationship with the European Union, a positive one, a friendly one that can work in the interests of everybody. But it's just a different relationship. And the world moves forward. You know, nothing stays the same. We shouldn't be embarrassed about that. We should embrace it. She gave, I think, a very strong positive speech. She embraced everything that we at Leave Means Leave have been campaigning for. She used our strapline that no deal is better than a bad deal, and that's absolutely right. And to pick up Lord Myners' point about the parliamentary vote, if in the extraordinary situation they were to say, no, we don't agree with the deal that's negotiated, then fine, we just revert to WTO rules. But what is crystal clear is 2 years after serving Article 50, we're leaving the European Union, and the sooner the better.
Well, Richard, you mentioned the WTO rules. This is something that JP Morgan's market strategist has said this afternoon to his clients. Taken as a whole, we do not believe the no-deal WTO option as credible.
I just fundamentally disagree. This is the same JP Morgan that forecast that, we would fall into a recession in the last 2 quarters of last year. These supposed experts in the city have been woefully wrong over the last 12, 15 months. I think they continue to be wrong. They should be ignored, frankly. Most countries in the world operate under WTO rules. If it works well for the United States, for Australia, for China, if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us. We shouldn't be worried about that at all. It's a perfectly acceptable base case.
Well, Lord Myners, I'm just going to let you respond to that. But let's hear what Theresa May said, first of all, about a transitional deal.
It is in no one's interests for there to be a cliff edge for business or a threat to stability as we change from our existing relationship to a new partnership with the EU. By this, I do not mean that we will seek some form of unlimited transitional status in which we find ourselves stuck forever in some kind of permanent political purgatory. That would not be good for Britain, but nor do I believe it would be good for the EU. Instead, I want us to have reached an agreement about our future partnership by the time the 2-year Article 50 process has concluded. From that point onwards, we believed a phased process of implementation in which both Britain and the EU institutions and member states prepare for the new arrangements that will exist between us will be in our mutual self-interest.
So do you believe that phased implementation is practical?
I think it's almost certainly necessary. I understand why Exeters are nervous about this, because they think it's keeping one foot in. But I think in a practical sense, it's going to be very difficult, Ian, because one of the things which Theresa May didn't really refer to is that the stance of Michel Barnier in negotiation will be Article 50 is about negotiating the terms of exit. It'd be interesting to hear Richard's view about Theresa May now saying we're going to have to make continued contributions. There could be quite large capital sums. That will be the focus of negotiations. And Barnier's initial stance will be I'm not willing to negotiate anything after exit until exit has been agreed and ratified. If I go back a moment earlier to your conversation about JP Morgan and WTO, I don't think the word not credible is sensible. It can work. What is not credible is the Prime Minister talking about some associate status of the Customs Union and also accepting WTO terms. You can't have both. So that is a slight cake and eat it. But compared with the earlier cakes and eat it, this is a much more qualified issue. We've narrowed it down.
OK, Richard, that is a point. Theresa May conceded in her speech, didn't she, that we are going to have to carry on paying into the EU in some shape or form. I mean, that is something that you said wouldn't happen if we voted to leave.
No, actually, if you examine what she said that if we want to continue to be part of certain programmes in and around the European Union, then it's reasonable to consider contributing towards that. That's a very sensible, friendly way of saying we want to continue with certain arrangements that work for us. It may be Erasmus, it may be Horizon 2020, whatever. So that's a sensible way of approaching it, and we should welcome that. She set out a very firm but friendly tone from which to start the agreements. And in terms of Michel Barnier and his point about Article 50 in the negotiations, what he's suggesting is illegal. Under Article 8, they have a legal obligation to negotiate the new arrangements with us during this 2-year period. So he's completely wrong.
Richard, how much is an acceptable sum for the UK to be paying into the EU after Brexit?
Well, that'll come out in the round of the negotiation. We'll see how it shapes up. The Prime Minister and her negotiating team will look at it in the round. And I'm confident, based on everything we've heard so far, that she will come up with a sensible arrangement. But if she doesn't, then she's been absolutely clear, and we should have no worries. No deal is better than a bad deal.
Well, no deal is better than a bad deal. Is 2 years enough time to get any sort of deal at all?
Well, I don't think it is, Ian. I'm being quite straightforward about that. I fully accept we're going to leave the EU. I was a Remainer, but I accept that the decision has been taken. And all credit to the Prime Minister. She's not making any excuses. She's not saying this is going to be harder than you thought it was. So now it's on her and her ministers to deliver to this timetable and to this outcome. I think there are still significant issues. There are large payments that will have to be made to exit. These could be several billion pounds, which we've not she didn't address. Article 8, Richard, doesn't refer to negotiations between an EU and an EU country. So Article 50 is the only one that matters here, and Article 50 is quite clear. It's about exit. And I've dealt with Michel Barnier. I've negotiated with him in the past. He's a difficult lighter, and he'll play it hard. He'll also play hard the whole issue of EU citizens being here. I mean, they've been left hostage by Theresa May. She said nothing about the right of continued residence of existing EU people in the UK, or indeed our people in EU countries. So there are a lot of things out there Barnier is going to use to negotiate with us on.
OK, well, Richard referred to the no deal is better than a bad deal. Let's hear what Theresa May had to say on that.
While I am sure a positive agreement can be reached, I am equally clear that no deal for Britain is better than a bad deal for Britain. Because we would still be able to trade with Europe, we would still be free to strike trade deals across the world, and we would have the freedom to set the competitive tax rates and embrace the policies that would attract the world's best companies and biggest investors to Britain. And if we were excluded from accessing the single market, we will be free to change the basis of Britain's economic model.
So, Richard Tice, Theresa May is effectively threatening to turn the UK into Singapore on steroids if the EU doesn't give us a deal that we can work with. Is that very wise?
I think, to be honest, we should be aiming for that anyway, regardless of whether or not we have a deal. You know, it's a huge opportunity. Singapore on steroids sounds pretty good to me. And if you lower tax rates, then growth will be higher, and therefore you'll create more jobs and more revenues for the government to spend on public services. So we should be looking forward to that anyway. I would be delighted if the Chancellor would say that we're going to move towards a 15% corporation tax rate.